Hello, and welcome to the Student Ministry Conversations podcast. This podcast is all about equipping, encouraging, and inspiring youth pastors weekly with topics that are brought to the table by youth pastors from all over the world. Hey, and welcome to the podcast. If this is your first time listening to us, we want to welcome you and invite you over to our website, studentministryconversations.org. There you can find all of our recent episodes, our show notes, blog articles, and even a few free downloads that we throw on there every now and then. But the point of this podcast is our goal is for you to be inspired, encouraged, and the things that you hear on this podcast are just things that equip you to be a better youth pastor for the church that you're serving in. And so today we are sitting down, and this is kind of the beginning of a transition. I think we've mentioned this in an episode or two, and we'll go into it more here at episode 200, that we are 2 episodes away from 200, which is crazy to me. But at episode 200, we are going to talk about the new season, what's coming up, and one of the major changes that we'll be making is, even though we want to include guest episodes sometimes can be really hard to round up and do one a week. And so we are going to shift the focus of the podcast a little bit. We're still going to bring different topics, but it's going to be a lot more of a combination or a whole collaboration of the 4 hosts, me, Russell, Melissa, and David. And so we are going to do our best to continue conversations and still provide guest episodes every now and then. So obviously, if you want to be on that, we'd love for you to be a guest on our episodes still. But we're going to kind of shift content and shift the way that we present things a little bit for season 5. Season 5 just sounds crazy to me. Like, I cannot believe that's just wow. But so with that being said, we are going to kind of shift to more of a roundtable discussion where it's more of us doing the talking and conversations. And so we are going to have a conversation today about attending conferences. And so if you watched on our social media this past week, Melissa and I were at Youth Pastor Summit that's put on by Student Leadership University in Dallas. And it's one of many events that they put on across the country. But me and Melissa went to the one in Dallas. And so we're going to talk about a little bit of a recap on that, as well as just what you need to know for attending conferences. And so, Russell, take it away.
Yeah. So hi, my name is Russell Martin. If you have not been here before, so I was with Brent from the beginning of season 1 back in the dark ages. So I have been a youth leader for 30 years of experience in that, and I am now a senior pastor. And so bringing a little different perspective. But one of the things that I remember was years and years of going to youth specialties. So going to YS and wherever it was held with friends and such, and going to those things, and I looked forward to those. And so I think today we can kind of talk a little bit about what you get at those conferences, but also, as Brent said, how do you prepare? So first of all, Brent and Melissa, y'all went, and just tell us a little bit about the conference y'all went to, and then we'll kind of dive into some more specifics.
Yeah. Melissa, go for it.
Oh man. So Brent's gone more times than I have, but I've gone to this one twice. And I had been going to another youth conference before this that was more in my denomination. But then when we changed denominations, it got a little awkward because they stayed. And I did go 1 year after we switched denominations because I really did like that conference and I liked the people, but it wasn't even theology differences. It was just awkward because we were all still in that split of the 2 denominations. And so I didn't go to another conference the next year. And then Brent was like, let's go. And I was like, okay, let's go. So we went to YPS in Dallas. It was at the Prestonwood Baptist Church, which is gigantic, huge,
fancy.
So fancy. And so that was kind of neat. Well, first of all, to see a different church than what we are, normally live in every week, and to see what other youth facilities look like, so you can kind of get ideas. So I like that. But then also we liked the speakers, we liked the worship, and we liked the breakout sessions. It's also a really good opportunity to get to meet other people. But I will tell you, the first thing that they said to us, and I think this is something that needs to be Like, you need to go into a conference experience with this mindset of, they said, no one needs you right now. None of you sitting here need to get up and go fix the sound system, which did screw up like 12 times. And
which was hilarious.
We were all sitting there like, because it's all pro presenters, like half of us use that, and so we probably all could have fixed it. But the point was that we were not to be a member of the staff that day. We were not to be the ones fixing. I didn't have to watch any kids and their behavior and talking in church, or, can I go to the bathroom, Miss Melissa, 12 times during a service. I could just be me. I didn't have a husband to figure out. I didn't. Even this year, we didn't have a really young youth pastor to keep a hold of, like we did last year. We were all adults. Everybody could take themselves to the bathroom. We did take our phones everywhere with us to make sure somebody didn't leave us someplace. Brent. But that's the reason I took my phone into the bathroom at the gas station. Like, just in case he decides to leave me here. But it's not like a regular,
the trust.
Yes. But it's not like a regular youth event. Like when you take your youth to Six Flags and you are on the whole time and you have to make sure that no one is injured or lost or doing stupid things. For the most part, if my friends of other youth pastors were doing stupid things, I was not responsible for that. And so that was a little neat. They said, put your phone down. Like, there's probably staff meetings happening right now that you are not a part of, and they may be asking you questions, but that's not what this time is for. This time is for you to recharge and to worship. And so I thought that part was really cool. So
I want to pause within that because the conversation is going to go everywhere. But even just in that moment, so they announced that to you. Like, what is your thought between there and when do you finally live into that? Because I'm sure,
like, when you finally turn off.
Yeah, like is it when they first said that? Were you immediately relaxed, or did it cause you even more anxiety? Or make you think about it?
I think I picked my phone up after that. I think I checked my messages one last time to make sure that nothing was happening, because I had kids like that I had to get to school before I left. And so we had to have who's picking them up from school, who's taking them to their activity, and like all that scheduling of having my own children places, because I normally do all those things. And the husband could normally take some of that slack, but he was really busy at work these last 2 days. He's band director, is UIL, and so big contest. And so we really had to rely on our friends to kind of who's picking him up, who's taking Dorothy to tumbling, all those kinds of things. So I was checking my phone the last time, but then I did put it down, like in my bag, so I couldn't see it. But I did think that was funny. Yes, I checked it one last time.
All right, so
just to add to that, on the mindset of like when they were like, you don't have to be the youth pastor here. Mm-hmm. You can be here to relax and recharge. And you talked about the pro presenter and the videos not playing and everything like that. And I was like, the uncomfort level in the 500 seats of youth pastors that were like, I want to go fix it. Yes! I want to go fix it. Like, just having that, like, having that said right before all of the tech difficulties happened was hilarious to me, because typically we'd be the ones that all jump up to go fix it. But it was kind of like this freedom of like you were saying, it's just like, you don't have to, mm-hmm. which is really, really cool.
But I think like we could probably dive in a complete other episode about that anxiety it produced.
Yeah.
And how we find our identity often as the person who can fix things, or the one who can take care of things, or I don't have to deal with myself as long as I'm dealing with something else. Anyway, whole other episode. So Melissa, talk us through more, and Brent, more about the conference.
Well,
yeah. So I was gonna say you talked first, so I guess I'll take lead on this one. Mm-hmm. So the cool thing about conferences, and YPS is no different. YPS is so fun fact. Actually, the way that Russell and I met, my pastor was just like, hey, I have a youth pastor that is relatively new to this. And with that, my youth pastor being new, I need someone to go to this conference with. And would you be willing to go to this conference with my youth pastor? And so that's how Russell and I met. Russell and I drove from Texarkana, Texas to Nashville, Tennessee.
Nashville.
And I say Russell and I drove lightly because Russell had to drive the whole way.
It's a long way.
That is a long drive.
It was so yeah, it was a long drive from Texarkana all the way to Nashville. But go ahead, because you probably remember the story differently.
Yeah, so but I mean, basically, like I was saying, is just the mindset of like I was a relatively young youth pastor that had no clue what he was doing. Um, I had been in a youth ministry for 2.5 years before this, and I really did not have much of any formal training or mentorship or anything. And so a conference to me was very much like, oh my gosh, like this is so much material. Um, and I kind of had to just like leave myself at the door because I didn't know anybody. I tagged along with you. And then we kind of just hung out with friends of yours in ministry. And so it was very much like I have to go into this and just take the most I can out of it. But I think that is one of the things with conferences that can be the most beneficial, is just this mindset of like leaving home at home, as much as you can. And so YPS though was really really good this year, and I think one of the things that most conferences do well is they try to address issues that are like hot issues at the time. But I think one of the things, and we talked about this on the van ride home yesterday, was the mindset of when they did this, not only did they find those pressing issues, but then they found some of the leading speakers on those issues and got them to come, which was really, really cool. And I think that made this year so much more powerful than previous years because of just that availability. And so we had a breakout with Dr. Kathy Cook. I don't know if y'all are familiar with who she is, but she does a lot of stuff with Focus on the Family, and she runs a nonprofit called Celebrate Kids. And she was phenomenal. She talked about identity of kids and how identity is often misplaced in childhood. And like one of the things that we have to like push to make them understand is just the idea that their identity is not something that is tangible or flexible. Their identity is as concrete as God made them. And so it was really, really cool. And so she was probably my favorite. Very, very captivating. But she was just one of many. Melissa, what was another one?
So when you were talking about with the different speakers, I thought that was very interesting that it was very current. Like yes, the topics were like really today current. Like, I mean, they couldn't have gotten anything more like they could have thought of these things yesterday kind of thing. And this is what we're going to talk about. So I really like Kathy Cook. I love the way she was talking specifically about watching for suicide in students and to let them know that they are wanted. And because if they were not wanted by God, then they would not exist. And so that was a really cool thing. One of the things they give you when you go to our conference usually is they give you a little book. And it has all of those, the people that are going to be talking at the event, and it gives you space to write. So I took a bunch of notes. And my goal today is to kind of sit down because I had a bunch of ideas and I wrote them down, but that was 2 days ago. So now I have to kind of figure out what I was thinking. But there was a lot about what can you do with parents. They had a lot of research on the actual like parents want their kids to have a better spiritual experience. And they, for the most part, parents like their youth pastors. And so that was kind of cool to hear, but that they'd actually talked to parents and had the percentages and the research. And so they had the facts behind what they were saying. Dr. Ed Newton, I liked him a lot. And he talked about the salt and light in Matthew. Then he actually said you can look up the Salt Institute of America, and there's 14,000 uses of salt. So it was interesting to see that scripture brought into like a practical, how does salt stop having impact by being compromised. You talked about the Red Sea and how it's got gypsum in, and you can't use that salt because it's there. And so that talks about a lot about our youth pastors and pastors in general, about how we can still have all that salt and be, but if we are compromised, then our salt is compromised. And so it was really interesting.
So thinking through, if someone who's never been to a conference, because for a while it was YS and Orange were the kind of two main ones, and they kind of combined, and I haven't been for a while, and I know they're still going on, but there is, if you are doing a conference, there's some main parts, and I'm gonna try to go through what I remember, and you tell me, Melissa or Brent, if there's anything else. So usually there's big main speakers, concert, fun kind of main event deals with usually a band and a keynote speaker in that. Typically there are also, like I already talked about, the breakout sessions. So one of the things that I would love to go through is, obviously when you get a breakout, when you get a book and you're looking at it, there's way more breakout sessions than you could ever go to. So what are some of the criteria that you use when choosing those sessions, and when you're trying to figure out what to go to as individuals going? Because I have an idea for groups that are going as well. But Melissa or Brent, what are some of the things that you use to decide what sessions you're going to go to?
Yeah, so with that, one of the things that I do is most of the conferences that I've been to, I've tried to bring more than just me. And I think that's a pivotal thing when it comes to conferences for the breakout purposes, especially, because then it's kind of like you get to sit in on multiple breakouts, and you get to have notes for all the different breakouts that you can go to. And so a lot of times I just kind of sit in the back and I'm just like, hey, I'll go to the breakout that like is least interesting to everybody else, and let the people that are with me go to the breakouts that are I guess their favorites. And the cool thing about that is, like I said, you have the mindset. We took 4 to YPS, and ironically there were 4 breakouts per session, and so by technicality we were kind of in all 4 breakout sessions for both of the breakout times, because we would just kind of divided and conquered and just said, hey, everybody take good notes, and then we will discuss those notes in the car.
And now
Melissa,
we're going to discuss them on Thursday at coffee now. But so when I've gone to conferences by myself, because the one I used to go to, I was the only one that went from our area, and I made friends while I was there. But you had to sign up for the breakout sessions before you got to the conference for this one, so everyone was scheduled. And sometimes I would pick the thing that maybe was really needed in my church that I needed to learn about. Or sometimes I would pick the thing that was completely out of my comfort zone, out of my wheelhouse, I knew nothing about. And I think when you go with that kind of mindset, that I could go with the things that I need to know about, I could go with the things I want to know about because I really like those things, or I could go with the thing that I know nothing about. You may learn really interesting things in all 3 of those categories. So I think that you can't just stick with the one thing, especially if it's the one thing you already know. If you pick all the things you already know about, you're wasting your time. There's kind of no point for you being there. And sometimes we do need to be pushed out, because that one thing that may be way out of your comfort zone or way out in left field, that may be the thing that your kids need that you didn't know, or is the thing that's going to be your next really cool event. And so I think that's kind of interesting when you look at it in different categories.
So we talked about the main event speakers. We talked about the breakouts. Truth time. You can answer this. Maybe not for this conference. Maybe for a previous conference you've been to. But have you ever skipped a main session or a breakout?
Yes.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
So tell me the benefit of doing, because I'm sure there's some people who go. Brent, this may have been Brent when he first went. My church paid for this. I paid for this. I've got to get everything, and I need to be at every session and do everything. Why is that the wrong mentality? Brent, go
Well,
ahead.
I think that there's two different approaches to that. Because first off, I think when it comes to something like YPS, which if you're unfamiliar with Youth Pastor Summit, it starts at like 3 o'clock p.m. on a Monday and ends at 3 o'clock p.m. on a Tuesday.
Okay.
And so it's not a huge conference to where you feel like you're gonna, like where it feels like overbearing and taxing to hit everything. And so I think with the smaller conferences like that, it might not be as much of an issue. But with stuff that used to be there, like National Youth Workers Convention or Orange Conference, stuff like that, that's a little bit longer. I think sometimes we can be so over focused and hyper focused on hitting everything, like you said. And part of this is, I mean, conferences are supposed to be relaxing and retreats too.
And recharging.
And so you are stepping out of your like normal day-to-day stress and lumping on more stress when you're supposed to be removing stress is kind of the opposite of what you need to be doing. But I mean, I think this kind of hits conferences across the board. I when I'm looking, like when we're doing this conversation, like I have a monitor next to the screen that I'm doing the call on, and me and my wife went to Weekend to Remember, which was a marriage conference back in like October. And one of the things with that, it was like, that was the same premise too. And one of the first things they said at that conference was like, hey, look, this conference is for you to get better at marriage. If you want to be in the sessions to make your marriage better, great. We want you here. If you don't want to be in the sessions and you want to go spend a weekend in a hotel with your spouse and never see us again, great. We want you there. And like, so it was very much this mentality and focus of like, whatever you need to do to make this time most efficient for you is how you need to proceed. And so, especially when it comes to those conferences that are a little bit longer, or the conferences that do have a little more, I guess, of like, man, how am I going to hit this all? Taking a breath and being like, man, I want to make sure that I hit these 5 sessions, and then I don't really care about this one or this one or this one because they don't seem as relevant to me, is totally fine. I don't do that as much at Youth Pastor Summit because, like I said, it's just a day, and typically it's not super overbearing, and they give you breaks for dinner and stuff like that. But I for the bigger conferences and the conferences that last a little bit longer, I think that's a pivotal part of conference stuff, is taking those breaks and finding time for you to just be away and be out of the office and just be restful and relaxing.
Melissa?
Well, and I would say the last one that I went to that wasn't YPS, that was one of the longer ones, it was like a 4-day one. I got sick in the middle. And so then it was, oh, like I have to get up and go to all this stuff. And it was more anxiety than that I needed at that moment. And I just stayed in bed and rested and watched TV. But like, I also didn't want to get anybody else sick. But I had to give myself permission to do that I didn't have to suck it up and go be nauseous and headache and the whole 9 yards in these sessions. And I may have missed something that was going to radically change my youth ministry, possibly. But I think that God was also saying, hey, you can stay in that bed and get better so you can go home and then take care of your people. So it was probably better I got sick when I wasn't home because I didn't have to take care of people. It was just me. But I didn't have to feed myself. So that was...
Yeah. I remember going to youth specialties, and I went back when Mike Yaconelli was there while he was still alive. And that's one of the first things he said with some of my first conferences was like, if you want to go to every session, you can. If if you're here with your wife and you want to not go to every session and you want to stay in your hotel room and that's what you need for your marriage and your ministry and everything, then great. We'll tell your church that you went to everything. But the reality is I think that there is, don't go to a conference, go to get information and stuff like that, but don't go to it thinking you have to do everything, because honestly, some of my best times and most learning at conferences has been while I'm sitting in the lobby while the main session's going on or something like that, or I sit and talk with someone and it goes past, the next session, and I'm like, hey, this conversation is important, or playing nine square in the air in the lobby with the youth leaders and stuff like that. So you are there to make connections. You are there to grow. And sometimes you know what a speaker is saying, or you've already read the book, or you've already done whatever. If you bring a team, it's a great time. We always would pick one night on a longer conference to go out to eat and not have to rush to get back. Mm-hmm. And so for you to pour into your ministry team, if you take interns or you take assistants or whatever you have, to go and say, hey, we're going to miss this session, and we're going to go further in the town away from the conference area, and we're going to eat and do this. So definitely you're paying money, your church is paying money, go and get from it, but have that permission. Also, most of them, at least when I was going, provide at least a way of some sort for you to get those talks. It used to be, I remember the days of tapes, and they would do the tapes and move to CDs, and now mostly it's a download. So most of the conferences you go to for an extra fee, or sometimes not for an extra fee, you can pay and get, the whole conference or whatever that is recorded, and they record those. So I don't know if that's what happened at y'all's, but I know that was available.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember that with YPS. SLU doesn't do it. Or youth. I mean, I remember that at National Youth Workers Convention. YPS doesn't do it. But I do think that was one of those things that was really, really kind of it almost was a sigh of relief, because it was like, oh man, I don't have to go to everything. And then while you were talking about that, another thing that kind of popped into my brain was just the mindset of conferences almost don't have to be about technology, about acquiring and attaining knowledge anymore like they used to, because we have all of the access of YouTube and everything that's on Reels on social media and stuff like that. So I see conferences much more now as introducing you to new minds in ministry, or new minds in research, or new people that are doing new things that you might not have in your bubble. But then you can go do your homework, and you can study and research all the different things that they are talking about, and then kind of continue your education even away from the conference. But that relational aspect and the networking with other youth pastors and stuff like that, that is exclusive to the conference.
Yeah. You mean how I went to one of the breakout sessions with Ryan McDermott talking about alpha generation, and then I realized that you had talked to him on the podcast in February about the exact same thing. And if I had just listened, I would have way more knowledge going into that breakout session.
It gives you that ability. Now, one of the things that Melissa and I talked was preparing to go to the conference. And so I want to kind of revisit that question. And we'll start with Melissa and then go to Brent. But Melissa, what are some of the ways that you prepare just to go? Your family, your church? I know you said that you didn't tell any of your church you were leaving.
No, it wasn't the church. So I forgot to tell my family. My husband specifically, Sunday night, I was like, hey, I'm going to Plano tomorrow. So I had actually been training Girl Scout leaders Friday to Sunday, and so I was camping at the state park with them, and so I got back into town, and it was like, oh shoot, and I even wrote on my calendar, hey, prepare for next week, and I completely forgot. So then I had to make the calls of who's picking up this kid and who's taking this kid and who's doing dinner and all that kind of stuff. And so, but I forgot to tell my family until my daughter didn't know until Monday morning when she was going to school. I was like, hey, I won't be here when you get home. So you need to make sure that your staff knows that you're going to be out of the office in case there is something that you need to get done before you leave. And I wasn't even in church on Sunday, so that probably didn't help me. But I had to tell my family, I had to make plans. So luckily, I didn't have to make the plans of travel. Brent had done that already. So he got the hotels, and we took their church vans. And so that was lovely for me, that I didn't have to kind of make those arrangements. So if you're going as a group, definitely do that all together so you can save the money, because it's silly for one person to have a hotel room all to themselves. And then that was part of the neat thing, because we had 2 guys and 2 girls go, that we each had a buddy in our hotel room. In fact, it was Shauna, who's been on the podcast, was like, I'm not going if Melissa's not going. And that was oh, well, yeah, I want to go too. So, but how we had to make those arrangements so so we could go. Could we theoretically have gone, because it's 3 hours away, we could have gone to the single day and then driven back to Abilene. We could have done that. Would that have been as much fun? Absolutely not. Would that have been very tiring? So much tiring. And we got to go out to dinner together and eat. We had one of our new guys from the next town over that went with us, and so we got to really know each other a whole lot better, and have like more in-depth conversations about personalities and like where you grew up and things like that. And so I really liked that we had that time together. But the planning ahead, where you do have to do things to get there. What do you think, Brent?
Yeah. Um, so Brent Melissa was talking about just kind of her plans. What were some of the things that you uh, thought of and you had to take care of? Because we just talked about making sure you plan together if you're going with a group and all the details and things like that. But what are some of the things you personally, either with this conference because it was shorter, or that you think about in the longer conferences when you're preparing to go?
Yeah, so and like I said, it depends on the conference. With some of the conferences, obviously, like when they're like a week long or 4 days or stuff like that, it's a little more intensive on what you have to plan and prepare for. With this one, it's not very much. We told our staff, my associate youth pastor went with me, and so we both left, and we're like, hey, we're gonna leave on Monday, not gonna be back late Tuesday, so we're not gonna be in the office, obviously. Um, and that was about the extent of that. But we both have other things that we do throughout the community and different things like that. So making sure that all of your plans are made, making sure that everybody that normally expects you to be somewhere knows that you're not going to be there. I think I've mentioned this a time or two when we are going through like in previous episodes, but I'm a licensed school chaplain for the state of Texas, and Melissa is almost finished with hers. And so Tuesdays are typically my day that I go to schools, and I am a chaplain, and so I had to make sure that I emailed both schools and was like, "Hey, just so you know, I'm not gonna be there." And so just making sure that all of your ducks are in a row is really, really important. And then also just kind of the pre-plan of like making sure everything, like making sure the ins and outs of the normal stuff, you're packed up and all that stuff. And then one of the things that I like to do for conferences is people that I've met in the past, I'll always reach out and be like, hey, are you going this year? And just try to pre-plan some of the connections that I know I have coming. And just make it a point to catch up and see people that I haven't seen in a while due to proximity or due to them just being in different parts of ministry or whatever. And so finding those opportunities to where I can kind of like, hey, be like, hey, like let's make sure that we meet up and grab a cup of coffee, or hey, I'm gonna be there the whole time. Just come say hi, or I'll try and find you, something to that nature. And making the most out of those networking moments is one of my things.
Yeah. Well, I've got a meeting coming in, so I want to ask a couple just final questions and give you both a chance to respond. And that is one is what is your mindset when you're finding a conference? So if we have a youth leader who's um, like looking, like where do you find out about them? Like where would somebody find that? Um, and then how do you kind of choose? So Melissa, what's your do you have any criteria you look at?
So, I say a couple big ones. If there's a curriculum that you use all the time, they probably put some kind of conference on at some point. So that would be a good place to look. If you're using, the train is going by, sorry. If you're using Orange or if you're using Cokesbury, whatever, like, because this one is kind of put on a little bit by Lifeway. And so I like that because you get to know what's coming out, especially children's ministry. You get to know what VBS is coming out. But there's another way. If there's a university near you that they have a seminary program, or even undergrads in religion, they might have something going on. And then the other big one is the youth ministry Facebook pages. I don't know how many times I see on there, what's a good youth pastor conference? So there's always somebody having a list, and you could probably go to the national ones or your state ones, because we've one for the state of Texas. And so it's usually, where's one that I can go to close to me? And then maybe you can start traveling farther. But I really like the idea of staying local-ish. State of Texas is very big, but so we can go to Dallas, San Antonio, things like that, and still be out of our little bubble and still get to meet people. But those are kind of my big three ways. What do you think, Brent?
Brent, how do you find those conferences to go to?
So a lot of times it's by word of mouth in all reality. The conferences that I go to, I found out about by other people. And so it's typically like just other youth pastors that I've come in contact with, or being invited by people, and just having those moments of interaction. The other thing I would say is there are a couple different, and I think Melissa kind of maybe touched on this a little bit, is there are just others that are just like, I know that like Youth Pastor Theologian on Instagram, he does a lot of different stuff, and he always puts out something to the nature of like, hey, here are the recommended conferences that I like. And then I know a couple other social media youth pastor people that do that as well. And so, I mean, you can find different recommended conferences through people that you follow, or you might just see that you really like a speaker and they're going to speak at this conference in your proximity a couple hours away, and you're like, man, that sounds great. And so I would say word of mouth mostly is my way of finding conferences.
Well, and then the last one, your denomination. Like if your denomination has a youth pastor conference, that may be the one that you need to go to for whatever reason, but definitely check those out.
Yeah. So kind of a shorter, little different episode, and like I said, these will expand and change. But a final question I think we should kind of touch on is just what else would you add to this conversation? If you're closing it out, Brent, what are any final thoughts that you have about conferences that you want to share?
Don't see them as a waste of time. And I think that sounds kind of redundant and cliche. But I know a lot of youth pastors that feel like their job is too important for them to be gone to go to a conference or to go to a continuing education of some sort outside of getting a degree from a university. Your job is important, but you are not that important. You can take a week away, I promise. It just involves some planning. It involves organizing your volunteers and leaders, and it involves finding a conference that fits your schedule. And there are plenty of them out there. All else fails, find a conference that's online. I even know of a couple youth pastor conferences that they do 100% virtually, and they're still really, really good. Grow obviously does GrowCon. And that is 100% online. They haven't done, I don't know if they've done it this year or not, but they've done one in the past. I think there was another one that was like Youth Pastor Conference or something to that nature. It was 100% online. And so there's even virtual conferences where like you can still be sitting in your office. I wouldn't recommend those because like part of getting away, that relaxing and refreshing doesn't happen with a virtual conference. But still, if you're in it for the education purposes or finding those extra pieces of information that might make you better at youth ministry, that is something that you can do as well. And then also just kind of a final closing thing with that is if you don't have a conference that is close to you or you don't have a conference in your area, do what we did. This past October, we started our own conference. And so we have one in our area now that just kind of covers the surrounding areas. And we started it out of like off the ground, had no real big plans or anything to that nature, but we had almost 20 people show up to our first one. And we are probably expecting somewhere in the realm of 30 to 40 this year, which is awesome. And people were excited about it last year. They really enjoyed the conference. And all we did was put a bunch of our local youth pastors up there and had them talk about things that they knew about. and they felt like were skill sets that they could share with other people. Just like this podcast is with other guests. Like we all have things that we have experience in and that we can share, and other people can learn from. And so we just took that and made our own conference out of it.
Awesome. Melissa, why don't you finish out, and then why don't you close us out and tell us goodbye?
There we go. So my last thing is to put it in your budget. So if you have to pay for the conference, you have to pay for the hotel, you have to pay for some meals, you have to pay for gas. When you're planning your budget for next year, make it a line item. And so I think I have $100 budgeted for conference. And so I didn't have to use it all because I went with other people. But put that in your budget. Make it a emphasis, a concentrated, it's an intentional thing. Now put it in your budget. And then my last thing is we are so glad that you joined us today. Please check out our website, studentministryconversations.org, for all of the fun and cool things that Russell puts out there. And if you want to talk about something, let us know. Come talk to us, and let's have some things. Our goal is to make you a better youth leader in whatever context you are in. So y'all have a great day, and we'll see you later. Bye.